He gave a bleeding biker a bottle of water in a dim warehouse aisle, 40 seconds of humanity. By sunset, he lost the job that fed his daughter. By dawn, 40 engines rolled onto his street chrome, flashing like stormlight. This is Single Dad Lost His Job for Helping a Biker. Hell's Angels sent 40 riders to his house. If you believe one small mercy can rewrite a life, follow this story to the end and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from so we can see how far this road of hope has traveled. Buckle up. Listen close. Because kindness moves faster than fear, and tonight it's roaring louder than regret. One choice. One life changed forever. Tonight. The warehouse lights hummed faintly, flickering above rows of stacked boxes that looked like silent towers in the dim early morning. It was barely 6 o'clock, but the chill in the air cut sharp as glass, and Mark Danner had already been on his feet for hours. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as he walked his section, scanning for anything out of place. Mark had been doing this job for more than a decade, security inventory checks, the occasional overtime when another man didn't show up. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much. But it was steady, and steady was all that mattered when you were raising a 10-year-old daughter alone. That morning, though, something felt off. At the far corner where the camera's blind spot stretched like a darkened pocket, a shape shifted. Mark's brow furrowed. He moved closer, slow, cautious, though fatigue made his steps heavy. What he found made his breath hitch. A man slumped against the crates. Leather jacket torn at the sleeve, a crust of dried blood at his collarbone, one eye swollen nearly shut. He looked like he'd been beaten and left to rot. His chest rose shallowly, breath wheezing, but his posture, head tilted up, spine stiff, still carried a stubborn pride. Mark froze. His first thought wasn't rules or trespassing or calling it in. His first thought was this man's hurt. He glanced toward the camera overhead. The angle missed this corner by inches. Nobody would see. Nobody would know. Mark reached into his worn lunch bag and pulled out what little he had: a thermos of coffee half full and a plastic bottle of water. He crouched down, wordless, and held the water out. The man's hand trembled as he took it. He unscrewed the cap, slowly tilted it to his lips, and drank. They didn't speak, but in that silence, something heavier than words passed between them. A kind of recognition. Only 40 seconds. That was all. The biker pushed himself upright, nodded once, then slipped back into the shadows, and was gone. Mark stood, feeling the weight of his choice settle over him, though he didn't regret it. He couldn't just walk away. He didn't know that in a few days this moment would change everything. 2 mornings later, Mark showed up for his shift, like always. Cap pulled low, the one Emma had stitched for him with crooked red thread spelling out "My Hero." He didn't notice the manager waiting near the aisle until it was too late. Todd Coleman stood flanked by 2 security guards, clipboard clutched to his chest like a judge holding a sentence. "Mark," Todd said flatly. "We need to talk." Mark slowed. "What's this about? You were seen on camera aiding an intruder. You didn't report it. That's a violation of protocol." Mark blinked, stunned. "I gave a man water. He was bleeding." Todd didn't flinch. "And you let him walk away. That's negligence. You're terminated effective immediately." The words hit like a hammer. Before Mark could protest, the guards moved in, escorting him toward the exit, as though he were a criminal. No handshake. No thank you. Just silence. Outside, the cold wind sliced through his jacket. Mark sat on the curb, staring at the empty lot. His hands shook, but not from the cold. 10 years of loyalty erased in an instant. His thoughts spiraled. How would he tell Emma? She was only 10, still too young to carry the weight of adult burdens. But life didn't pause just because she was young. Rent would still come due. Bills would still pile. Mark rubbed his face, feeling the sting behind his eyes. He wouldn't let her see him break. He rose, walked home through the drizzle, and forced his steps steady. That evening, Emma was hunched over her coloring book at the small kitchen table. Her dark hair fell in her face as she scribbled bright stars onto a page. Mark leaned against the doorframe, soaked jacket, dripping, trying to shape a smile. "Just wanted to spend the day with you," he said softly. Emma's brow furrowed. "Are you sick?" He shook his head. "Nope." Her voice dropped quieter. "Did someone die?" Mark gave a weak laugh. "No bug." "Nothing like that." She paused, eyes searching his face. Did we get fired? His heart cracked. She always said we never you, because in her mind they were in this together. Mark nodded once. Emma slid off her chair and wrapped her arms around him tight, her voice muffled against his jacket. It's okay. You're still my hero. Mark closed his eyes, clinging to her small frame like an anchor in a storm. Later that night, while Emma slept under her ceiling stars that glowed faint green in the dark, Mark sat at the table staring at unopened envelopes. Bills, notices. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, fighting the pressure building in his chest. He didn't cry, but he came close. Then faint at first he heard it. The low, distant rumble of motorcycles. He stilled. It grew louder like a rolling storm of engines weaving together. The sound built, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Mark rose, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. Headlights cut through the dark. One by one, motorcycles lined the street outside his small rented home. Not 2. Not 10. More than 40. Chrome glinted beneath the street lamps. Leather jackets bore insignias most neighbors wouldn't recognize, but Mark understood enough these weren't just random riders. Emma stirred in her room, footsteps padding softly. "Daddy," she whispered. Mark turned heart-pounding, shielding her behind him as he stepped into the doorway. Outside engines idled in unison, the sound vibrating through his chest. And then he saw him. The biker from the warehouse, the man he'd given water to. But this time he stood tall, clean-shaven, no bruises, eyes sharp. He nodded once at Mark, then stepped aside. From the line of riders, a figure emerged. Tall, broad, a silver beard flowing over a black leather vest. His patch glinted under the streetlight. "You helped one of ours," the man said, voice gravelly but calm. Mark swallowed. "I just gave him water," the man smiled faintly. "Exactly. And no one does that anymore." He reached into his vest and pulled out a gleaming silver key, holding it out toward Mark. "Come with us. There's more to this story." Emma peeked out from behind her father's leg, eyes wide. "Are you superheroes?" The silver-bearded man chuckled. "No kid. We're just people who don't forget." The engines rumbled steady as a heartbeat waiting. Mark's hands trembled not from fear, but from not knowing what came next. The sound of 40 engines didn't fade. It pressed against the windows, seeped through the walls, rattled in Mark's chest like a second heartbeat. He stood frozen in the doorway of his small rented home. Emma clutched to his side, her tiny fingers digging into his hand. The silver-bearded man held the key out with a calm patience, as though the entire street weren't holding its breath. Curtains twitched from every house, neighbors whispering, cell phone cameras catching shaky footage. Mark swallowed hard. His instinct screamed to shut the door, to lock it, to keep Emma away from men like this. But the biker's eyes were steady, not wild. Honest. "I don't want trouble," Mark managed. His voice cracked from the weight of it all. "You didn't cause trouble," the leader replied evenly. "You eased a man's pain when nobody else would. That kind of man, we ride for him." The biker Mark had helped stepped forward, then the one called Ridge. He extended a hand, scarred knuckles and calloused palm open. "Name's Ridge," he said. "You looked me in the eye when I was invisible." Mark hesitated. Then slowly, cautiously, he reached out and shook Ridge's hand. Still confused, he asked the only question that fit. "Why are you all here?" Ridge's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Because we don't let men like you fall." The silver-bearded leader pushed the key into Mark's palm. It was heavy cold. "This unlocks something we think you've earned. A second chance." Emma's eyes lit curiosity, glowing brighter than fear. "Daddy?" she whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Let's go." Mark looked down at her. He wanted to say no to keep her safe, but then he looked back up, saw the rows of engines, the faces lined with respect rather than menace. For reasons he couldn't explain, he nodded. The leader gestured toward the back of the line. A black van idled quietly, its engine a steady hum against the thunder of bikes. "Come," he said. Mark took Emma's hand. Together they stepped into the night. The van's door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside sat something Mark hadn't expected, something that stopped him cold. A motorcycle. But not just any. Matte black. Red trim polished to a shine. Lines sleek, clean, powerful. A Harley-Davidson rebuilt with care, gleaming as though it had been reborn from ashes. Mark stared. His jaw worked, but no words came. I don't ride, he stammered. You don't have to, Ridge said gently. But your father did. The words hit Mark like a punch to the ribs. He turned sharply, confusion mixing with disbelief. My father. The silver-bearded leader stepped closer, eyes soft with memory. Rusty Danner. Rode with our chapter back in the 80s. Quiet man, good man, always fixed what others broke. He died before you turned 10, didn't he? Mark's throat tightened. He nodded barely. How do you know that? The leader reached into his vest, pulled out a photo worn at the edges. He held it out. Mark's breath caught. His father, Rusty, smiled in the picture grease on his hand, standing beside a younger version of Ridge. This bike was your dad's, the leader said. We rebuilt it in your honor. In his honor. Mark's hands trembled as he reached out, fingers brushing the handlebars. It felt like touching a memory. Emma's eyes widened. Daddy? Is it ours? Mark couldn't speak. He swallowed hard, blinking back the sting rising in his eyes. The convoy of motorcycles roared to life again. The van pulled into line. Mark sat in the passenger seat, Emma curled beside him, eyes pressed to the glass as the riders flanked them on both sides. Their engines weaved a protective shield around the van's steel and leather, moving as one. The city streets blurred past. Stoplights, storefronts, gas stations, everything seemed smaller with the sound of 40 engines pounding against the night. Emma whispered nose against the glass. They're like knights. Mark glanced at her, then back at Ridge riding point. He didn't say it aloud, but part of him thought the same thing. They drove for nearly an hour past neighborhoods and highways until finally the convoy slowed. They turned into a wide, empty lot where a weathered building stood. At first glance, it looked abandoned. Dust on the windows, paint peeling, but then the garage doors rolled open. Lights flickered on inside. And there it was, a fully equipped motorcycle repair shop. Tools gleamed on walls, fresh paint coated every surface, the smell of oil and sawdust lingered in the air. Above the entrance, a freshly painted sign read in bold letters, Danner Customs. Mark froze. What is this? Ridge stepped up beside him, his eyes steady. Your new workplace, your new beginning. Mark shook his head, stumbling back a step. I don't understand. I don't have the money. I don't know how. We'll teach you. We'll help you. Ridge cut in. His tone carried no doubt. Your dad taught half of us. Now it's our turn. Emma grinned wide, clapping her hands. Daddy's shop. Mark felt his knees weaken. His heart pounded as he stared at the sign again, then at the men around him. He wanted to argue, to refuse to say it was impossible. But deep down, a tiny ember he thought long dead sparked to life. They walked inside. Mark's fingers brushed over the smooth countertop. The socket wrenches hung neatly on the pegboard, the scent of fresh lumber. It all felt impossibly familiar, like stepping into a memory he had never lived but always carried. On the far wall hung a single tool belt, dusty but intact initials burned into the leather, R.D. Rusty Danner. Mark's throat closed. His hand shook as he lifted the belt from its hook. It smelled faintly of oil and leather. When he strapped it around his waist, it didn't feel strange. It felt like home. The biker stood back, letting the silence stretch, giving him space to feel the weight of the moment. Emma tiptoed around the shop, inspecting every corner with delight. She plopped onto a stool, pulled a scrap of paper from her bag, and began sketching. Ridge leaned toward Mark. Sometimes silence says everything, he murmured. Mark tightened the belt and exhaled. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, the knot in his chest loosened. Not because life was suddenly fixed, but because he wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the garage, painting streaks of gold across the floor. The smell of oil and wood still lingered in the air. But for the first time in a long time, Mark woke to something other than dread. Emma was already up, perched on a stool by the front counter, sketching furiously with a box of half-broken crayons. Her tongue stuck out in concentration as she scrawled letters across a scrap of paper. Mark rubbed the sleep from his eyes and leaned against the doorway, watching her. What are you drawing, Bug? Emma turned the paper around proudly. Bold letters spelled Danner Customs outlined in shaky flames. Our shop sign, she said with a grin. Mark's chest tightened. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's pretty good. It's perfect. Ridge's gravelly voice cut in from behind. He leaned against the workbench, arms folded, eyes crinkling with approval. We'll get that painted on the window. Emma beamed. Mark shook his head, still overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what I'm doing here. Ridge pushed off the bench. You'll learn. You've got the hands for it, same as your old man. The silver-bearded leader stepped forward, his tone calm, steady. Listen, Mark. This isn't charity. This is legacy. Your father gave more to us than you'll ever know. We're not handing you a gift. We're giving back what was always meant for you. Mark lowered his gaze, fingers tugging at the tool belt strapped around his waist. The leather felt heavy, worn, but grounding. I'm not him, No Ridge said simply. You're you, and you're the man who gave a stranger water when the world would have walked away. That's enough. Mark swallowed hard, unable to respond. By midday, the bikers had gone, leaving Mark and Emma alone in the garage. The silence felt strange, heavy, but not unwelcome. Mark wandered the shop, brushing his hand across the polished surfaces, the neatly arranged tools. Every detail screamed of preparation of men who'd thought this through. Bill still waited at home. The world outside hadn't changed. But standing there, he felt something he hadn't in months possibility. The bell above the front door jingled. Mark turned startled as a woman stepped inside. She wore a faded denim jacket, her hair pulled back, fatigue etched into her face. Is this open? She asked softly. Mark hesitated. Not really. Not yet. Her shoulders slumped. Figures. She held up a bike helmet. Chain snapped on my Harley. Can't afford the dealer. Mark glanced at the bike parked outside a battered machine that looked as tired as she did. He opened his mouth to refuse, but Emma tugged his sleeve. Daddy, you can help her. The woman looked embarrassed, ready to back out. Sorry, I shouldn't have, No Mark interrupted, straightening. Wait, let me see it. It took him 2 hours and 3 failed attempts before he managed to fix the chain. His fingers were raw, his shirt stained, but when he rolled the bike back out, it purred steady. The woman blinked, stunned. You did it. Mark shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. Just took some elbow grease. Tears welled in her eyes. My husband used to do this. He's gone now. I didn't know what to do. Mark froze. He wasn't sure how to respond. But then she stepped forward, hugged him tight, and whispered, You didn't just fix the bike. You fixed something I thought was gone. Mark stood stunned, arms hovering awkwardly before he patted her back gently. Emma clapped her hands. See, Daddy, you can do it. The woman pulled away, wiping her cheeks. I don't have the money right now, but... Don't worry about it, Mark cut in. You'll pay when you can. She nodded, voice thick. Thank you. Then she mounted the bike and rode off steadier than when she arrived. Mark watched her go, chest heavy, heart pounding. Ridge's words echoed in his mind. That's enough. Later that evening, as the garage grew quiet again, Mark sat at the counter, Emma doodling beside him. Her little drawing of flames around Danner Customs sat taped to the window, now crooked but proud. The street outside was quiet. No engines, no applause, just the hum of a single neon light buzzing overhead. Mark leaned back, exhaling. He'd lost his job for giving a stranger a bottle of water, and now strangers had given him back a life. He wasn't sure how long it would last, but for the first time in weeks, maybe years, he didn't feel like he was falling. Emma rested her head on his arm, eyelids drooping. It's our shop, Daddy, she murmured sleepily. Mark looked down at her lips, trembling into the faintest smile. Yeah, Bug. It's ours. And for the first time, he let himself believe it. Morning sunlight spilled across the shop floor, dust motes drifting lazily in its golden beams. Mark stretched his back sore from the day before, still feeling the weight of the tool belt against his hip. The air smelled faintly of oil and sawdust, comforting in its own way, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Emma sat at the counter, tapping her crayons against the wood, eyes bright. Daddy, do you think people will come today? She asked, her voice tinged with hope. Mark gave a faint smile, though doubt gnawed at him. Maybe. We'll see. She grinned undeterred and turned back to her latest sketch, a version of the shop sign now surrounded by stars and lightning bolts. Before Mark could answer, the faint roar of an engine echoed from the street outside. His stomach tightened, unsure whether to expect another customer, or something else. The door opened, the bell chiming. Ridge stepped in his boots, heavy against the concrete, his presence filling the room. "You survived your first day," Ridge said with a crooked grin. "Barely," Mark muttered. Ridge glanced at the crooked sign Emma had taped to the window. He smirked. "Looks official to me." Emma puffed her chest proudly. "I made it?" Ridge crouched to her level voice, softening. "Then it's already the best shop in town." Emma giggled, and Mark felt his chest tighten. There was something in Ridge's tone that reminded him of a big brother he never had. Ridge motioned for Mark to follow. "Come on, there's something you need to see." They walked outside. Parked at the curb was the black Harley from the night before, its paint gleaming chrome polished until it caught the morning sun like fire. Mark's breath caught. "That's my dad's bike." Ridge nodded slowly. "Rebuilt from the ground up, every bolt, every line. We kept it alive all these years." Mark stepped closer, his hand trembling as he brushed his fingers over the handlebars. The leather seat was smooth, freshly stitched, but still carried the ghost of wear. Memories he hadn't touched in years flooded back his father's rough hands, the smell of motor oil on his jacket, the rumble of that same Harley when he was small and sat perched on the seat clinging to Rusty Danner's waist. I thought it was gone," Mark whispered. "It was never gone," Ridge said quietly. "Just waiting for you." Mark's throat ached, his vision blurring. Emma tiptoed closer, her eyes wide. "Daddy, can you ride it?" Mark forced a shaky laugh. "Not like your grandpa could." Ridge stepped forward, laying a hand on the seat. "You don't need to ride it yet. But understand this, Mark, your father wasn't just one of us. He saved lives, fixed what was broken when no one else could. Men still ride today because of him." Mark turned sharply. "You knew him." Ridge's eyes softened. "He patched my gas line on a winter ride with nothing but duct tape and grit. Saved my life. That's why we rebuilt this. Not just for him, for you." The silver-bearded leader approached, then his presence commanding without force. He held another object in his weathered hands, a small tin box, its surface scratched with years. He offered it to Mark. Inside lay a handful of old photographs, some yellowed edges curled. One showed Rusty Danner, grinning grease on his hand's arm slung around a much younger Ridge. Another showed Rusty on that very Harley. Emma's wide eyes reflecting his face almost perfectly. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. He was one of the quiet ones, the leader said softly. Didn't talk much. But when you needed him, he was there. That kind of man leaves a mark that doesn't fade. Mark closed the tin box, slowly swallowing past the lump in his throat. "I don't deserve this." The leader tilted his head. "That's where you're wrong. You gave Ridgewater when the world turned its back. That tells us everything we need to know." Emma tugged at Mark's sleeve, her eyes shining. "Daddy, Grandpa's bike is ours now." "Isn't that amazing?" Mark knelt, cupping her face gently. His voice broke. "Yeah, Bug. It's amazing." By afternoon, the shop felt alive again. Ridge showed Mark how the lifts worked, guiding his hands through motions with patience. Another biker, Chains, explained the booking software, his gruff voice softening whenever Emma asked questions. Emma darted around the shop like a tiny inspector, sketching her official logos on scraps of paper and sticking them to the walls. At one point, she climbed onto the stool and declared proudly, "This is the best place ever." Mark laughed, shaking his head. "You're the boss already, huh?" She nodded seriously. "Yep, I'm your partner." Ridge smirked. "Smart kid." "She's right. You're not doing this alone." Mark's gaze swept across the shop, the tools, the bike, the men who stood quietly in his corner. He felt the knot in his chest loosen just a little more. For the first time, he wasn't defined by what he'd lost. He was standing in what he might gain. That night after the bikers had left, Mark and Emma sat outside the shop on the curb. The sky above turned purple, streaked with orange from the setting sun. Emma leaned against him, tired but glowing with excitement. "Do you think Grandpa would be proud?" she asked softly. Mark stared at the Harley through the open garage door, the bike gleaming like a monument. His throat ached, but he managed a whisper. Yeah, Bug. I think he would. The engines of the day had faded, replaced by crickets and the soft hum of the streetlight. For the first time in a long time, Mark allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. The morning air carried a crisp bite, the kind that made breath visible and reminded Mark of long-forgotten autumns with his father. He stood in front of the garage, staring up at the freshly painted sign, Danner Customs. The bold letters gleamed in the sun, Emma's crooked drawing taped proudly in the corner of the window beneath it. His chest swelled with pride, but also fear. This wasn't a warehouse shift where you clocked in and clocked out. This was his name above the door. His father's name. His responsibility. Emma skipped in circles around him, clutching a piece of chalk. She stopped suddenly and began scribbling stars on the concrete in front of the garage. So everyone knows this is a special place, she explained earnestly. Mark chuckled softly. You're doing all the advertising for me? Of course, she said, tongue sticking out as she worked. I'm the boss, remember? Before he could reply, the low rumble of engines approached. Mark stiffened, the sound still foreign in his quiet street. But when the convoy of bikers came into view, his tension eased. Ridge led the pack, followed by half a dozen riders. They parked with precision engines cutting off in near unison. The silence that followed was almost reverent. Morning, Ridge called, stepping off his bike. Morning, Mark replied, wiping his palms nervously on his jeans. Ridge's gaze swept across the shop. You ready for the next step? Mark hesitated. What step? The silver-bearded leader who'd stayed in the background before walked forward now. His eyes held the weight of quiet authority. The world already thinks you've got a shop, but now it's time to run it. Mark's stomach twisted. I told you I don't know how to do this. Ridge's voice dropped, calm but firm. Then you'll learn, starting today. The bikers spread out, each moving with purpose. One checked the lifts, another organized the tool wall. Chains booted up the booking software, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble on the keyboard. Emma sat on the counter, swinging her legs as she watched with wide eyes. It's like a team of superheroes, she whispered. Mark swallowed. Or troublemakers, he muttered, though he couldn't deny the way the shop seemed to pulse with life under their hands. Ridge walked him through basic repairs, showing him how to strip a chain, how to listen for the subtle whine of an engine about to give. His voice carried the rhythm of a man who'd spent a lifetime with machines. You don't fix bikes with just your hands, Ridge said, tapping Mark's chest. You fix them with this. You listen. Mark tried fumbling at first, but every mistake was met with patience instead of scorn. Ridge guided his grip, adjusted his stance, taught him when to use force and when to ease off. For the first time in years, Mark felt like a student again. Not the kind who failed tests or disappointed teachers, but the kind who was trusted to learn. By midday, sweat dripped down his temples, grease stained his shirt, and his arms ached. But when Ridge stepped back, nodding approval, a flicker of pride surged in Mark's chest. Emma hopped off the counter, running to hug his waist. You did it! Daddy? Mark laughed, wiping oil across his forehead. Barely. You'll get better, Ridge said. Your father was the same way. First time he tried fixing a carburetor, he nearly set it on fire. Mark blinked. You're kidding. Ridge's grin widened. Not one bit. But he learned, and so will you. The silver-bearded leader stepped forward, then his gaze steady. This place is more than tools and steel, Mark. It's a bridge between what your father left behind and what you'll build now. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but Emma spoke first. He can do it. He's my hero. The men chuckled, the sound rough but warm. Mark felt his throat tighten, emotion threatening to spill. That afternoon, as the bikers prepared to leave, Ridge clapped Mark on the shoulder. Be ready tomorrow. You'll have your first customer. Mark blinked. Already Ridge smirked. Word travels fast. When the engines roared back to life and faded into the distance, silence settled again. Mark leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. His body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from work that mattered. Emma taped another sketch to the wall, a stick-figure family standing in front of a giant motorcycle, all smiling. Above it, she wrote in uneven letters, Our Shop. Mark stared at it for a long moment. Then he whispered, almost to himself, maybe this really is ours. The next morning, he arrived early. He wiped down the counter's polished tools, tried to make the space look less like a gift and more like his own. His nerves buzzed like live wires. The bell over the door jingled. A woman stepped in, tired-eyed faded jacket, a helmet dangling from her fingers. Her voice shook slightly. Is this place open? Mark hesitated, heart pounding. This was it. He straightened, met her eyes, and said, yes, we're open. The woman lingered just inside the doorway, shifting her weight nervously, eyes darting around the spotless garage as if afraid she didn't belong. The smell of oil and new paint filled the silence between them. Mark wiped his palms on the rag tucked into his belt, trying to look confident, though his stomach churned. What's the problem with the bike? He asked, his voice steadier than he felt. She held up the helmet like a peace offering. The chain snapped. Dealer wants $500 just to look at it. I can't. She trailed off, her throat tight with shame. Mark nodded slowly. He understood that tone all too well, the tone of someone standing at the edge, tired of fighting battles no one else could see. Emma hopped off the stool where she'd been sketching and scurried over, her hair bouncing. Daddy can fix anything, she declared, puffing out her chest. He fixed Grandpa's bike. Mark flushed. Bug easy? But the woman's lips trembled into a small, grateful smile. Is that true? Mark hesitated, then gave a little shrug. I can try. They rolled the battered Harley inside. Mark crouched down, examining the snapped chain, the scuffed paint, the tired look of a machine that hadn't been loved in a long time. It's been through a lot, he murmured. The woman crossed her arms, hugging herself. So have I. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Mark swallowed. Give me a couple hours. She nodded, biting her lip, then wandered to the corner where Emma was back at her coloring. They began chatting softly, Emma pointing out stars on her picture, the woman laughing gently for the first time in what looked like weeks. Mark set to work. His hands shook, at first clumsy with nerves, but the longer he worked, the more instinct took over. He remembered Ridge's calm instructions, the way his father's tool belt felt snug around his waist, grounding him. The first attempt failed. The second nearly did too. But he refused to quit. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His arms ached, but he kept pushing. Finally, after what felt like forever, the bike purred back to life under his hands. Mark exhaled a shaky breath, chest heaving. He wheeled it forward, wiping grease from his palms. The woman's eyes widened. You fixed it. Mark gave a modest shrug. It should hold. Might need some extra tuning in a few weeks, but you're good to ride. Her voice broke. My husband, he used to fix it. He's gone now. I didn't think I'd ever hear it run again. Mark froze, unsure what to say. But then she stepped forward, suddenly wrapping her arms around him. The hug was fierce, desperate, grateful. You didn't just fix the bike, she whispered against his shoulder. You gave me something back I thought was gone. Emma clapped her hands, grinning from ear to ear. Told you Daddy could do it. Mark chuckled softly, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. The woman pulled back, wiping her cheeks quickly. I don't have the money right now. I'm so sorry. Don't worry about it, Mark interrupted gently. You can pay when you can, or not at all. Her lips trembled. Thank you. Really. She strapped on her helmet, mounted the bike, and rode off the engine, humming smoother than it had in years. Mark stood in the doorway, watching until she disappeared down the street. Later that evening, Ridge returned. He found Mark leaning against the counter, Emma asleep beside him, with crayons still clutched in her fingers. Ridge glanced at the empty space where the bike had been. First customer Mark nodded, weary but proud. She couldn't pay. I told her not to worry. Ridge smiled faintly. That's the way your old man did it too. Sometimes payment ain't in dollars. Mark's throat tightened. I don't know if I can do this, Ridge. Bills don't wait. Ridge leaned in, voice low but firm. You'll figure it out. You've already started. And you're not alone in this. Mark exhaled slowly, glancing at Emma curled against his arm. For once, he let the hope flicker without smothering it. Over the next few days, word spread quietly. One customer became 3. 3 became 5. Each story different, a father needing his bike to get to work, a college kid who couldn't afford the dealer, an older vet who just wanted his machine to run one last summer. Mark worked late into the nights, his hands blistered, his body aching. But each time an engine roared back to life, each time a face lit up with relief. Something inside him healed too. Emma decorated the counter with her drawings, each one brighter than the last. "It looks official now," she told him proudly. Mark smiled faintly. "It does." One evening, just as Mark was closing up, the bell jingled again. A boy no older than 17 stood in the doorway pushing a half-broken scooter. His sleeves were rolled up, his eyes darting nervously like a stray dog expecting to be kicked. Mark frowned. "You okay, kid?" The boy hesitated. It won't start. I need to get to work." Mark stepped closer, crouching beside the scooter. "What's your name, Eli?" the boy muttered, avoiding his gaze. Mark glanced up, catching the bruised shadows beneath his eyes, the weariness that didn't belong on someone so young. "All right, Eli," he said gently. "Let's see what you've got here." Eli shifted his weight uneasily, one hand gripping the scooter's handlebar like it was the last thing tethering him to the world. His clothes were thin for the weather, his sneakers frayed, and though he tried to stand tall, Mark could see the exhaustion written in every slouch of his shoulders. Emma peeked from behind the counter, her eyes wide with curiosity. She tilted her head, whispering, "Daddy, he looks hungry." Mark gave her a small nod, then turned back to Eli. "Where are you headed?" The boy shrugged, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Night shift at a diner. Bus stops running after 11. I'll get fired if I don't make it." Mark crouched down by the scooter, running his fingers along the rusted frame. The thing was a mess, wiring, frayed engine caked with grime bolts loose. Most people would have tossed it. "You keep this thing running by yourself?" Mark asked. Eli gave a little shrug, shame flickering across his face. "Best I can. Learned from YouTube." Mark let out a breath through his nose. "Not a bad start, but it needs more than duct tape and prayers." For the next hour, the garage filled with the smell of oil and the scrape of metal on metal. Mark worked steadily, guiding Eli's trembling hands through the steps. "Hold this wrench steady," Mark said, demonstrating. "Don't force it. Let it give." Eli followed, clumsy at first, but quick to learn. Sweat dripped down his temple, but his focus didn't break. Emma hovered nearby, handing them tools when they needed, her small face glowing with the importance of helping. At one point, Eli muttered, "Nobody's ever shown me this before." His voice cracked on the words, as though admitting it was harder than the work itself. Mark glanced at him. "Well, now someone has." The boy swallowed, blinking rapidly as he tightened a bolt. When the scooter finally coughed to life, its engine sputtering but running, Eli's jaw dropped. He stood frozen, staring at it as though it were a miracle. "How much?" he asked quickly, panic in his eyes. "I don't have." Mark held up a hand. "Nothing. You don't owe me." Eli shook his head. Disbelief etched into every feature. "That's not. People don't do that. Not for me." Mark studied him. The shadows under his eyes, the gaunt cheeks, the way his hands shook even now. He saw something painfully familiar, the look of someone who'd been left behind too many times. "You looking for something steadier?" Mark asked, wiping grease from his hands. "We could use a hand sweeping up running errands. Nothing fancy. But it's honest work." For the first time, Eli's eyes lifted to meet his. They glistened. "You'd hire me?" Mark shrugged casually, though his chest tightened. "If you want it." The boy nodded hard, his throat working. "Yeah, I want it." Emma squealed, clapping her hands. "Now we're a team." Eli let out a shaky laugh, one that sounded unused to joy. Later that evening, when Ridge stopped by, Mark told him about Eli. The biker leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the boy sweep diligently each movement, careful as though he didn't want to break whatever fragile chance he'd been given. "He reminds me of someone," Ridge murmured. Mark didn't ask who. He already knew. Over the next week, life inside Danner Customs began to take on rhythm. Customers trickled in, sometimes with busted chains, sometimes with engines that hadn't run in years. Mark tackled each job with grit and growing confidence. Eli shadowed him, soaking up every word, his posture slowly shifting from wary to steady. Emma became the shop's little ambassador. She greeted customers at the door, taped her drawings proudly to the walls, and sometimes perched on a stool to supervise, her voice filled with authority. One afternoon, she presented Eli with a drawing of their trio, Daddy, Emma, and Eli, all standing beneath the glowing sign. At the bottom, she scrawled "Family Team." Eli stared at it for a long time before tucking it carefully into his backpack, as though it were treasure. But while inside the shop life grew brighter, outside the world still whispered. Neighbors peeked suspiciously at the stream of leather-clad bikers who occasionally rumbled by. Some crossed the street when Ridge's crew came near. Mark noticed the looks. He saw the unease. Yet each time a customer walked away on a working bike gratitude shining in their eyes, the noise of judgment dulled a little more. One evening, Mark sat at the counter, Emma asleep in a corner, Eli tinkering quietly with spare parts. The garage lights buzzed softly overhead. Ridge leaned in the doorway, a smirk tugging his lips. "Word's getting out. People are talking about you." Mark frowned. "What are they saying, that you fix what others give up on?" Ridge replied simply. Mark let the words sink in. They carried weight heavier than the tool belt at his waist. A week later, the truth of Ridge's words hit him full force. It started with a single photograph posted online, a snapshot of Emma's crooked flame-covered logo taped to the shop window. Beneath it, someone had written, "Best mechanic in town with the kindest heart. Helped my brother for free when no one else would." Within days, the image spread. Local biker forums, community groups. Even a news outlet picked it up, dubbing him the man who fixes what others forget. Mark felt the shift. Calls increased. Customers lined up. And with each engine repaired, each life touched, the garage grew less like a miracle and more like home. The bell over the garage door jingled non-stop that following week. It was as if Emma's little drawing on the window had become a beacon pulling people who had all but given up hope on their bikes straight into Danner Customs. Mark barely had a chance to breathe. He spent his days under hoods, bent over chains, his fingers blackened with grease, sweat dripping into his eyes. Yet with each job completed, with each engine sputtering back to life, he felt something stirring inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Emma, meanwhile, had transformed into his self-appointed secretary. She greeted every customer with a firm, "Welcome to Danner Customs." Her drawings decorated the counter, the walls, even the tool pegboard. When people laughed at her flame-colored letters, she only puffed her chest out and declared, "That's our brand." Eli swept diligently, fetched tools, and slowly began trying his hand at small repairs under Mark's watchful eye. He still flinched whenever someone raised their voice too loud, but the shadows under his eyes had begun to fade. One evening, as Mark closed up shop, he stepped outside into the cool dusk air. Ridge leaned against his bike at the curb, arms crossed, watching him with an unreadable expression. "You're making waves," Ridge said. Mark frowned. "That good or bad?" Ridge smirked. "Depends on who you ask. But around here it's good." The next morning, as Mark adjusted a carburetor on a beat-up Yamaha, the bell jingled again. This time, the man who stepped through the door stopped Mark cold. Todd Coleman, the warehouse manager. The man who'd fired him without hesitation. He looked out of place in the garage, his pressed shirt, wrinkled tie loosened, face pale. His eyes darted across the walls, the tools, the logo taped proudly to the window. Mark straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. His jaw clenched. "Didn't expect to see you here." Todd swallowed. "Neither did I." Ridge emerged from the office, arms folded. His presence filled the room with quiet threat. Todd stiffened but pressed on. "I heard rumors," Todd said carefully, "that you were working with criminals. I had to see for myself." Mark's brows knit. "Is that what you told yourself when you fired me, that I was dangerous for handing someone water?" Todd's face flushed. He shifted, avoiding Mark's gaze. Corporate reviewed the footage. They said, "I acted too fast. You lost your job for something decent. I didn't protect you. I just covered my own back." Silence stretched heavy in the garage. Emma peeked from the counter, her small voice cutting through the tension. "He is a hero. You were wrong." Todd's throat worked. He nodded slightly. Shame etched deep. "I know." For a moment, Mark said nothing. His chest ached with the memory of that cold morning, the humiliation of being marched out like a criminal. He had every right to spit venom back, but instead he exhaled slowly. "Thanks for saying it." Todd blinked, clearly startled. He gave a small nod, then turned and left as quietly as he came. The bell jingled behind him. Ridge stepped forward, his tone low. That took more strength than breaking his jaw. Mark managed a faint smile. "I'm trying." That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, another customer appeared. Not in a car, not on a bike, on foot. A boy thin, shivering in the cooling air, pushed a bicycle with bent wheels through the doorway. His sleeves were rolled high, exposing forearms marred with faint bruises. His eyes were sharp but tired, darting like someone too used to being told, "Leave." Mark crouched down, inspecting the bent frame. Rough day. The boy gave a humorless laugh. Rough life. Ridge leaned in the doorway, his gaze narrowing, but he said nothing. Mark looked up at the boy. "What's your name, Eli?" he muttered. Emma bounded over, curious. "We already have an Eli." The boy gave her a blank stare, then cracked the faintest smile. Mark studied him carefully. "All right, Eli, let's see what we can do." The repair wasn't complicated. What was complicated was the silence that hung in the room. Eli finally broke it, voice rough. "I'm 17. No family. Sleep behind the library most nights. 2 part-time jobs. Scooter broke, so I walk." Mark's chest tightened. He recognized the hollow tone of someone fighting to stay upright when the world had already written him off. When they finished, Eli touched the working scooter like it was a fragile miracle. "How much?" he asked quickly, panic flickering in his eyes. Mark shook his head. "You don't owe me." Eli's face twisted with disbelief. "Nobody does that. Not for me." Mark met his gaze steady. "Then maybe it's time somebody did." The boy blinked rapidly, his lips parting like he wanted to say more but couldn't. "Look," Mark added, "if you're looking for steadier work, we could use a hand around here. Sweeping the lot, fetching parts. Nothing fancy." For a long moment, Eli said nothing. Then his voice cracked. "You'd give me a chance?" Mark shrugged. "Everyone deserves one." Eli's throat worked as he nodded hard. Then, "I'll take it." Emma cheered, throwing her arms around him in a hug that startled him so much he laughed an awkward, rusty laugh, but laughter nonetheless. That night, when the lights dimmed and the garage finally quieted, Mark sat at the counter, head in his hands. The sound of Ridge's voice cut through the silence. "You've built something here, Mark. Don't doubt it. You've given second chances to more people than you know." Mark lifted his head, exhaustion etched into his features, but in his eyes glowed a spark. He whispered almost to himself, Maybe this is what I was meant to do." The Harley in the corner caught the last glint of the setting sun, shining like a reminder of everything he thought he had lost, and all he was beginning to find. The morning began with a knock at the shop door, long before opening hours. Mark blinked awake from his makeshift cot in the corner office, the faint smell of oil and sawdust still heavy in the air. Emma stirred on the couch, hair sticking up in every direction. Mark dragged himself up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and pulled the door open. A woman stood there with a cell phone in her hand, grinning. "You're trending?" she announced. Mark frowned, confused. "I'm what?" She flipped the phone around. On the screen was a photo of his shop window, Emma's crooked, flame-drawn logo taped proudly at the glass. Beneath it, bold letters read, "Best mechanic in town with the kindest heart. Helped my brother for free when no one else would." Mark blinked. His stomach tightened. "Who posted this?" "Doesn't matter," she said with a smile. "It's everywhere now. Facebook groups, biker forums, even the local paper shared it." Before Mark could respond, the faint rumble of engines drew closer. A pair of bikes pulled into the lot, followed by a battered pickup. Strangers climbed out, tools in hand, smiles wide. Emma rushed out barefoot, her pajama shirt hanging loose. "Daddy, we're famous!" Mark stared at the vehicles lining up, heart pounding. This wasn't just word of mouth anymore. The story was spreading. By noon, the garage buzzed like a hive. Customers came in one after another, some for repairs, some just to see the man from the story. A mother with 2 kids thanked Mark for fixing her brother's scooter for free. A veteran shook his hand silently, his eyes glassy with gratitude. Emma played hostess, passing out juice boxes she'd smuggled from their fridge at home. Eli worked harder than ever, his hands blackened with grease, his pride unmistakable each time a customer nodded at him. Mark tried to keep up, but part of him felt unmoored. How had this happened so fast? The bell jingled again, and this time Mark froze. Standing in the doorway was Todd Coleman. Todd looked smaller, somehow stripped of the authority he once wielded. He glanced around the packed garage, the bustling energy, the customers smiling at Emma's drawings on the wall. His jaw clenched, shame written deep across his face. Mark crossed his arms, grease-stained rag clenched tight. "What are you doing here?" Todd shifted uncomfortably. I came to see it for myself. Didn't think it was real." Ridge stepped out from the back office, his presence filling the room with quiet steel. He didn't say a word, just stood there, arms folded, making Todd squirm harder. Todd swallowed. "Mark, I need to apologize. Corporate reviewed the footage from the warehouse. They said I acted too fast. Said, I cost you your job for no good reason. You were just helping someone, and I didn't protect you. I was scared for my own neck." The garage fell silent. Even Emma stopped mid-doodle to stare. Mark's chest tightened. Images flashed through his mind, being marched out by guards, the humiliation of standing in the cold lot. Emma's little voice whispering, "It's okay. You're still my hero." He had every reason to lash out, to throw Todd's words back in his face. Instead, he let out a slow breath. "Thanks for saying it." Todd's eyes flickered with surprise. For a moment it looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He just gave a stiff nod and slipped out the door, leaving the bell to jingle softly behind him. Ridge smirked faintly. "Redemption doesn't always roar, huh?" Mark wiped his hands on his rag. "Sometimes it whispers." The rest of the day blurred with repairs laughter and the low thrum of engines pulling in and out. By closing time, the garage was quieter, but Mark's head still spun from everything that had happened. Emma yawned, curling up on the office couch, with her markers scattered around her. She'd drawn another picture, this one of Ridge and the silver-bearded leader standing guard outside the shop, their bikes like shining steeds. Mark smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. He turned to Eli, who was tidying tools with a focus that seemed almost desperate. "Hey," Mark said gently. "You did good today." Eli glanced up, startled. Then a slow smile spread across his face, small but real. "Thanks." Ridge leaned against the counter, his eyes watching both of them. "This place, it's turning into more than a garage." Mark raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ridge's voice dropped low. "It's turning into family." Mark swallowed hard, his throat tight. For the first time since losing his warehouse job, since his life had collapsed, he let himself believe it. The cold bite of late autumn drifted in through the half-open bay door, turning the shop's breath into steam. Mark flipped the lights one by one until Danner Customs woke in a slow glow workbench. Lift's socket tree, the Harley in the corner catching a thin ribbon of sunlight like a blade. He warmed his hands on a chipped mug coffee, dark and bitter. Outside, the street still slept. Inside, the air smelled of oil and cut wood, and something else he'd come to recognize possibility. Emma padded out from the office in mismatched socks, hair a beautiful disaster. She climbed onto the stool behind the counter, hugged her sketchbook, and yawned so wide her eyes watered. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning, boss," he said. She giggled, then turned serious. "We need more stars in the window. People like stars." "Then stars we'll have." He tipped an imaginary cap. The side door clicked. Eli slipped in, early shoulders tight against the chill hands, already black with the memory of grease. "Trash is out. I'll sweep the lot," he said, not waiting for permission, not wanting to be a problem. "Eat first," Mark said, sliding a brown paper bag across the counter. "The diner sent these." Eli peered in. "Egg sandwiches, still warm." He blinked hard. "They didn't charge." "They said you cover a lot of nasty shifts, said it was our turn to cover you." Eli's throat worked. He nodded, swallowing gratitude that still felt new in his mouth. Engines stirred outside. Not 40, not thunder, just a few soft as a heartbeat. The bell over the door gave its bright chime, and the day began. The first through the door was an older man with winter in his beard and grief in his eyes. He pushed a dusty Triumph like a wounded animal. "Name's Harlan," he said, voice rough. "This bike hasn't run since, well," he cleared his throat, "since my wife passed. I promised her one more ride to the lake before the frost." Mark felt something catch behind his ribs. He rolled the Triumph onto the lift hands, steady voice low. "We'll make good on that promise." For an hour, the world shrank to bolts and breath. Eli hovered, learning by watching handing tools without being asked. Harlan stood back, hands in pockets, staring at the floor as if memories were scattered there like screws. "Try it," Mark said at last. Harlan climbed on. The engine coughed, stalled, coughed again. Mark adjusted a line, nudged the throttle, listened the way Ridge had taught him. Ears, not just for sound, but for stories machines tell when they're almost ready to forgive you. Now. The Triumph caught, held. A low, living rumble rolled down its spine. Harlan's mouth trembled. He shut his eyes, jaw working, then nodded once, small, fierce like a soldier saluting a ghost. He didn't hug Mark. Didn't need to. He set a folded photograph on the counter instead, a younger Harlan, a laughing woman on the pillion seat, lake light in their hair. "Thank you," he said. "You fix more than a bike." After he left, Emma slid the photo into a little gold frame she'd scavenged from a thrift box and set it on the shelf marked Stories. "That's what we keep," she announced. "Not the money. The stories." Mark looked at Eli. Eli looked back. Both men nodded. The girl was right. By noon, the bell had chimed so many times it sounded like a tiny church service. A single mom who delivered groceries on weekends. College kid with a scooter that squealed like a kettle whenever he hit 20. A nurse with night shifts who needed a headlight at 3 p.m. because by 3 a.m. the city forgets how to be gentle. Mark's palms blistered beneath the gloves. He didn't care. He matched breath to bolts, learned how to hear anxiety in an engine knock, how to feel hope in the clean sweep of a chain. At some point, Ridge drifted in and took up space the way mountains do, quiet, inevitable. He didn't announce himself. He just set a box of parts near the pegboard, poured coffee into a paper cup, and started teaching Eli how to listen with fingertips, not just ears. "Pressure's not your enemy," Ridge said, guiding the boy's hand. "Panic is. Breathe, then turn." Eli tried again. The stuck bolt relented with a soft, decisive sigh. He jerked his head up, startled, then grinned like a kid seeing snow for the first time. See, Ridge's mouth barely moved, but the pride was a sunrise. "It's not magic. It's respect." Emma clipped a star sticker to Eli's shirt. For bravery, she decreed. He didn't peel it off. Mid-afternoon, a reporter showed with hair perfect and questions sharper than her smile. A cameraman trailed her like a shadow. "You're the man who was fired for handing a biker water," she said, as though reading a headline out loud. "Can we get you on camera?" People love a redemption arc. Mark's stomach flinched. Cameras meant spectacle. Spectacle meant the story could stop being theirs. Ridge drifted between them, polite as a locked door. "He's got engines to fix," he said, "but I can tell you what matters." The reporter glanced at his vest. Thought better of arguing. The camera rolled. Ridge kept it simple. "I've ridden with saints and sinners," he said. "That man helped a stranger when no one was watching. That's rarer than winning on TV." It made the 6 o'clock news anyway. The clip ran without Mark's face, just his hand steady on a wrench, and Emma's flames flickering in the window behind him. People stopped by with pies and parts and prayers in that order. Mark kept his head down and kept working. At closing, a single white envelope waited on the counter. No return address. Inside, 2 months' rent, crisp and clean, and a note for the shop that fixes more than machines. Mark sat down hard. He didn't know which hurt more, needing help or getting it. He stared at the number until tears blurred it, then breathed out and whispered, "Thank you" to whoever had chosen to remain unseen. Eli hovered like a shy planet. "You gonna take it?" "Yeah," Mark said. Honesty tasted strange. "I am." He tucked the envelope into the bills folder with hands that shook and steadied. Taking help, he realized, is its own kind of courage. The silver-bearded leader came just after dark, a coat of November, riding his shoulders. He stood in the doorway, letting the streetlight turn his beard into wire. Emma waved like he was a visiting king. "You never told me your name," Mark said. The man smiled like a secret. "Cole." They shook hands again as if agreeing on more than names. Cole's gaze moved to the Harley Rusty's machine, waiting in the corner moonlight, finding the red trim as though it remembered the way home. "Ridge says the work is true," Cole said. "Says you're listening with your hands." "I'm trying," Mark said. "Some days it feels like cheating, like this place was handed to me." Cole considered him a long moment. Gifts aren't the same as charity. A gift says we see what you are before you believe it. The rest you earn day by day. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. Cole's voice softened. There's a ride coming up. Nothing loud, just road and air and a stop where wind remembers. Tomorrow at first light. If you're ready. Mark's throat tightened. He looked at the Harley. At Emma asleep in the office with markers still in her hands. At Eli quietly stacking tires in perfect towers as if order could keep his life from falling apart again. I'll be here at dawn, Mark said. If the bike will forgive me. It will, Cole said. It was built to carry Danners. That night, rain came thin and silky tapping at the bay door like a polite guest. Mark rolled the Harley closer, set a tarp just so, and stood staring at the initials burned into the old tool belt on the hook RD. He touched the leather. It was warm from the day's work. He whispered what he hadn't been able to say as a boy at a graveside he barely understood. I'm trying, Dad. The rain answered in soft applause. By the time he turned off the lights, the shop felt like a chest closing around a heartbeat. He spread a blanket over Emma, slid a second toward Eli without making a show of it, then sank onto the office cot and let exhaustion pull him under. For a moment, just before sleep, he felt the old fear rise. This won't last. The other shoe will drop. All of this is a trick the world plays before it laughs. He breathed past it, listened to the rain, to the tiny click of cooling metal, to a different sound deeper and steadier, the quiet, stubborn rhythm of a life refusing to break. Dawn came silver and thin. The rain had washed the street clean, left the sky the color of new steel. Mark stood at the bay door with a helmet in his hand that used to be his father's, and a knot in his stomach that had always been his own. Ridge rolled up first visor, up, grin, crooked. He tossed Mark a pair of gloves already warmed in his pockets. Road's calling, he said. Cole arrived next, engine low presence immense. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Mark swung a leg over the Harley. The seat took him in like a memory. He found the clutch, the throttle, the breath he'd been holding for 10 years. Easy, Ridge said. Let her come to you. Mark thumbed the starter. The Harley woke not with a roar, but with the steady, satisfied exhale of something that knows its purpose. It thrummed through his bones, through the soft places he'd tried to armor. He looked back at the shop, Emma framed in the office window with bedhead and a blanket around her shoulders. Eli beside her, two silhouettes raising their hands like a blessing. Mark nodded. Ridge eased out. Cole followed. Mark tucked in behind them. The street opened. The morning lifted. Ahead, the road stretched a ribbon, laid across a country that sometimes forgets how to be kind. He rolled on the throttle. The bike answered. Not loud, not angry, true. And as the three of them slipped into the clean light of a new day, Mark felt it fear, yes, but also something bigger, something truer, a quiet readiness for wherever the road would ask him to go next. Tomorrow there would be customers and bills and busted parts and people who needed saving in ways that don't make the news. Tomorrow he'd keep fixing what others gave up on. But today he rode. The road stretched out like a ribbon of steel under the pale dawn, the Harley humming steady beneath Mark. Wind whipped against his jacket, crisp with the last bite of autumn. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just moving forward, he was riding with purpose. Ridge kept pace on his left, Cole on his right, the three of them a triangle cut against the horizon. Mark's knuckles tightened on the grips, every vibration running through his bones. Fear prickled under his ribs. He hadn't ridden since he was a boy clinging to his father's waist. But the bike seemed to know him, seemed to remember. Each gear shift settled more naturally, each mile his chest eased. Behind them the town shrank. Houses became fields, fields gave way to winding roads carved through low hills where morning fog clung stubbornly. The engines were the only voices, a chorus that said without words, "You're not alone." They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Ridge lifted a hand signaling. The convoy, just 3 souls, but it felt larger, slowed to a pullout lined with wildflowers bending under the wind. Mark coasted to a stop, boots crunching gravel. He killed the engine, the sudden quiet ringing in his ears. There beyond the field stood a stone marker, weathered but cared for the engraving clear despite the years. Rusty Danner. Mark's breath caught sharp and sudden. His knees nearly gave. He hadn't been here since he was a teenager, angry at the world too broken to say goodbye properly. Cole stepped closer, voice low. We rebuilt it. For him. For you. For all of us who needed someone like him to remind us what decency looks like. Mark's chest heaved. His fingers fumbled with the helmet strap until he yanked it free, setting it on the grass with trembling hands. He walked forward, heart pounding in his ears. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. The stone was cool under his palm when he reached it. For a long moment he couldn't speak, his throat locked. Finally he whispered, "Hey, Dad." Ridge pulled off his gloves and set them gently at the base of the stone. "Your old man saved my life once. Patched me up when a busted gas line could have blown us both sky high. He didn't think twice, just did it. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." Cole set something beside the gloves, a single black leather glove of his own. He patched me together more times than I can count. Not just my bike, my spirit. Mark lowered to one knee. Slowly, he pulled Emma's flame-covered drawing from his jacket pocket, the one she'd proudly taped to the shop window. He smoothed the creases with shaking hands and placed it carefully against the stone. "She made this for the shop," he murmured. His voice cracked. "Said it was ours. Yours too." The wildflowers bent under the breeze, as if bowing. Mark stayed there longer than he meant to, lost in the weight of memory. His father's laugh muffled by time. The smell of oil that clung to his jacket. The sense that nothing was ever really gone if you kept it alive inside you. At last, Ridge rested a hand on his shoulder. He'd be proud. "And for the first time, you believe it too, don't you?" Mark nodded, unable to find words. They stood in silence until the sun crept higher, painting the field in gold. Then one by one, they mounted up. Mark swung his leg over the Harley. This time, the seat felt less like a stranger's and more like an inheritance. He thumbed the starter. The engine rumbled low, steady, loyal. As they pulled back onto the road, Mark glanced once more in the mirror. The stone stood alone, framed by wildflowers and sky. But he didn't feel the ache of abandonment anymore. He felt tethered, rooted. Back at the shop, Emma burst from the office as soon as she heard the engine's return. "Daddy." "You did it!" she squealed, running into his arms. Her small hands smelled faintly of crayons and juice boxes, a reminder of the world he'd promised to protect. Eli hung back, eyes darting from the bikes to Mark's face. "How was it?" he asked carefully. Mark smiled, though his voice shook. "Like coming home." Cole's deep voice rumbled from behind. "Your father rode with honor. Now his son does too." Emma looked up, brow furrowed. "Does that mean Daddy's a superhero?" Ridge chuckled. "Not a superhero kid, just a man who remembers what matters." Emma leaned her head against Mark's chest. "That's even better." That night after the shop closed and the bikers drifted away, Mark stood in the garage alone. The Harley rested in the corner, its shadow long under the dim light. He brushed a hand along the seat, whispering, "Thank you." Not just to the bike, to his father, to Ridge and Cole, to the world maybe for once choosing not to crush him. For the first time in years, when he looked ahead, the road didn't scare him. It called to him. The week after the ride to his father's memorial, the shop hummed with a rhythm Mark had never known before. The bell over the door chimed steadily from morning until dusk. Tools clinked. Engines sputtered, then roared back to life. The air carried a constant perfume of oil, leather, and sawdust. Mark worked with his sleeves rolled, his arms streaked with grease, his heart beating in sync with the machines he coaxed back to life. Each job was more than metal. It was a story. A father fixing his son's dirt bike. A college student desperate to keep her scooter running for class. A delivery rider trying to earn enough for rent. Every time Mark finished, every time he handed back a key, he watched relief, gratitude, or even quiet joy cross their faces. It was addictive in a way nothing else had ever been. Emma made the garage her kingdom. She taped drawings to the walls, added doodles to receipts, and proudly told anyone who'd listen, "We fix what people give up on." She wore an oversized apron Ridge had cut down for her, and though it hung crooked, she paraded around like it was a superhero cape. And Eli, he was different now, too. No longer the jittery, wary boy who crept in like a shadow. He carried himself taller, eyes steadier. When he laughed something that had become more common, it cracked like sunlight through storm clouds. One Tuesday morning, Mark got a call that left him uneasy. Emma's school wanted to see him. His stomach knotted. Parent meetings always meant trouble. He left Ridge and Eli minding the shop and walked Emma to school, her hand warm in his, her chatter a shield against his nerves. Inside the classroom, the teacher smiled warmly. "Mr. Danner, it's nothing bad. In fact, quite the opposite." Mark frowned, unsure. "Then why am I here?" The teacher gestured to a bulletin board. It was plastered with essays and drawings. Emma's work stood at the center. In crayon, she'd drawn him in a shop apron, hands resting on a motorcycle, a little girl in goggles beside him. Above it, she'd written in shaky letters, "My dad fixes what people give up on." Mark's breath caught. His throat closed. The teacher's smile softened. "She's been talking about your new shop non-stop, writing about it in essays, drawing it in art. We'd love to have you come speak at Career Day." Mark froze. "Me speak?" The teacher nodded. "Yes. You've built something meaningful. The kids would benefit from hearing your story." For a long moment, Mark couldn't breathe. Him Career Day was for lawyers, doctors, men in suits who hadn't been fired for helping a stranger. He shook his head slightly. "I don't know what I'd even say." The teacher smiled gently. "Just tell the truth. That's enough." That night, Mark sat at the counter long after closing. The garage was quiet, save for the ticking of cooling metal. He stared at Emma's crayon drawing still clutched in his hand. Emma patted in hair damp from her bath pajamas covered in tiny stars. She climbed onto the stool beside him, swinging her legs. "You saw my picture, didn't you?" she asked softly. Mark nodded, voice rough. "I did. Do you like it?" He looked at her eyes burning. "Bug, it's the best thing I've ever seen," she smiled, resting her chin in her hands. "Then you have to go, to Career Day. Tell them what you do." "I'm not like the others, Emma," he whispered. "I don't wear a suit. I don't have a fancy job." She tilted her head, her voice quiet but firm. "You fix things. You help people. Isn't that better than a suit?" Mark chuckled a broken sound that turned into something steadier. He leaned over and kissed her hair. "Yeah, Bug. Maybe it is." When the day arrived, Mark stood in front of a classroom full of curious faces. His hands sweated. His heart thudded loud enough he swore the kids could hear it. Emma sat in the front row, her eyes wide with pride, her little chin lifted like she was daring anyone not to listen. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a doctor or a lawyer," he began, his voice rough. "I fix motorcycles and scooters. And sometimes people, too, I guess." The kids leaned forward, intrigued. He told them about his father, about the Harley that had been rebuilt, about the shop that was more than a shop. It was a place where second chances lived. When he finished, silence stretched. Then small hands clapped. Then bigger ones. The classroom filled with applause. Emma beamed so hard she nearly toppled from her chair. Mark smiled, swallowing hard. For the first time standing in front of strangers, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. That evening, Ridge clapped him on the back. "How was Career Day, teacher?" he teased. Mark rolled his eyes, but the smile tugging his lips wouldn't leave. "Let's just say, Emma made me look good," Ridge chuckled. "She's been doing that since the start." Mark's gaze drifted to the Harley gleaming in the corner, to the framed photograph of his father, to Emma doodling stars on Eli's work boots. Maybe, just maybe, he thought this wasn't just survival anymore. It was life. Snow flurries tapped against the garage windows, the sign over the bay door, Danner Customs, haloed in frost. Inside, the heaters coughed and clanked, the air thick with the scent of oil cocoa and sawdust. Emma had demanded cocoa in December. It made the shop feel less like a garage and more like a home. Business slowed as winter deepened. Bikes went into hibernation. Customers counted bills before asking for repairs. Mark adapted. He sharpened snowblower blades, rewired a delivery scooter that stalled every other block, and tuned up a pair of ATVs for a father and daughter who refused to let cold weather steal their weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on and kept hope warm. Eli rotated space heaters between the lifts like a sentry on patrol. His knit cap slouched over one eyebrow, making him look younger than 17. Whenever a heater sputtered, he tapped it gently, whispering, "Stay with us, man. the same way he coaxed life out of stubborn bolts. Emma turned the office into her own winter wonderland. Paper snowflakes dangled in the window, glitter stuck to everything she touched. One evening, she dragged a chair across the floor, climbed up, and stuck a gold star above the doorframe. "So people feel like they walked into a movie?" she announced. "You're the art department then," Mark said, smiling. "I'm the everything department," she corrected, handing him a crooked sticker that read, "Hello, my name is Hero." He laughed and slapped it onto his apron where grease stained it by noon. Neighbors brought cookies and tins, each with handwritten notes taped to the lids. Ridge's crew stopped by occasionally to clear the lot trade jokes with Eli and let Emma plaster star stickers on their helmets. Their engines idled low at the curb, not thunderous this time, more like a choir humming in harmony. On the 23rd, a woman in a red coat stepped inside. Her helmet dangled from her hand, her eyes bright with tears. "You don't remember me," she said, voice shaky. "You fixed my chain when I couldn't pay." She set a casserole on the counter like an offering. "I got the job that week. I can pay now." Mark tried to wave her off. She insisted. They compromised. She paid in lasagna and laughter, plus a 20 slipped under the tin when she thought he wasn't looking. That night, after Emma brushed her teeth and zipped her jacket up to her chin, she lingered in the office doorway. "Daddy, will Santa know where the shop is?" Mark scooped her up, kissing the top of her head. "He knows where kindness lives," he whispered. "He'll find us." Emma nodded solemnly, satisfied. Christmas Eve arrived with skies the color of steel and streets dusted in white. The garage door was half open, letting in just enough light while keeping most of the cold out. Mark tuned a stubborn carburetor while Eli sorted bolts by size with monk-like focus. Emma perched on the counter, her cocoa mustache glowing proudly. Late afternoon brought the first tremor. Faint at first, then swelling. Engines. Mark set his wrench down slowly. Eli's head jerked up. Emma froze, mitten pressed to her lips. The sound grew louder, deeper, filling the street. Mark rolled the bay door open all the way. Headlights cut through the purple dusk. One by one, bikes poured into the lot, 5, 10, then 40, lined in precise formation. Chrome glinted under strands of tinsel. Santa hats perched on helmets. Ribbons flapped against cold wind. A battered speaker crackled faintly with Jingle Bell rock, distorted but joyous. Ridge parked first, front and center. Cole rolled in beside him, his silver beard glittering with snow. The rest of the riders fanned out a wreath of steel and leather around the open garage. Neighbors peeked from curtains, phones recorded, but no one looked afraid. The sight so often associated with fear shimmered instead with holiday warmth. Emma gasped. Her mitten slipped from her hand. Ridge dismounted and lifted a large box from his saddlebag, setting it on the counter like treasure. Cole placed a second beside it. "For the boss," Ridge said with a grin. "From the family." Emma blinked. "From us?" "From your riders," Ridge corrected gently. Emma glanced at Mark, seeking permission. He nodded, throat too tight for words. She tore into the first box. Inside lay a leather jacket, soft pink and stitched with care. Flames traced the sleeves, tiny and perfect. Across the back in gold lettering, "Little Rivers." Over the heart, her name, Emma. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Mark opened the second box. A child-sized helmet gleamed inside, black with a crown of painted stars, a miniature patch across the back that read simply AFA. Emma reached out, fingertips trembling. "Is this for me?" "For our road captain of tomorrow," Cole said solemnly. "For the one who drew the fire we all followed." Emma squealed, bouncing in place. "Daddy, can I wear it now?" Mark's vision blurred. He nodded. She slipped her arms into the jacket. Ridge crouched to help with the zipper, his massive hands uncharacteristically gentle. Mark set the helmet lightly on her head, fastening the strap beneath her chin. "Too heavy?" he asked. She shook her head fiercely. "I'm strong." Cole knelt so his eyes met hers. "A jacket means family, Little Rivers. But it means rules too. No rides without your dad. No rides without helmets. You hear engines, you listen. You hear your heart, you listen harder." "Deal." She nodded solemnly. "Deal." The bikers parted to form a lane. Engines idled low. Emma walked between them, boots crunching, snow jacket glowing against the twilight. The circle of riders cheered not wild, but warm like applause at a graduation. Neighbors spilled onto porches, some humming carols. Someone started Silent Night off key, but sincere. Engines softened their growl, falling into rhythm like a bass line beneath the song. Emma pressed Ridge's horn. It squeaked politely. Laughter erupted, breaking the cold wide open. Mark wiped at his eyes, failing to hide it. He hadn't cried when he was fired. He hadn't cried when the shop opened. But watching Emma stand proudly in that jacket, surrounded by men who treated her like royalty, he nearly broke. Cole's voice rumbled low beside him. "This isn't charity. It's belonging. She wears what you built." Mark nodded, unable to speak. After cocoa hugs and promises, the riders peeled away in twos and threes. Ribbons snapped in the wind, Santa hats flapping. The last to leave were Ridge and Cole. Ridge tipped his hat at Emma. Cole clasped Mark's shoulder and set a small envelope on the counter without a word. When the lot finally emptied, silence rushed back in. Emma stood trembling in her jacket, eyes glowing. "Daddy," she whispered, "they said I'm family." Mark crouched, unfastened her helmet, and kissed her forehead. "You are Bug. You always were. Now the world knows." Emma fell asleep that night, still wearing the jacket, her fist clenched in the hem, as if to keep it forever. Eli dozed in a chair nearby, knit cap low over his eyes. Mark sat at the desk, Cole's envelope in his hand. Inside was a heavy fuel card and a folded note for rides that teach, for miles that heal, keep leading from behind sun. Mark set the note in the frame on the shelf marked stories. He turned off the lights. The garage sank into darkness, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a promise. Winter loosened its grip, slowly reluctant to let go. Snowmelt trickled along the curbs, leaving behind grit and salt, while the shop's bay doors creaked open wider each day to invite in the thin warmth of early spring. The smell of damp asphalt mixed with oil and fresh paint. Business picked up again as bikes emerged from storage, their owners eager to hear engines roar after months of silence. Mark worked long hours, sleeves rolled, face streaked with grease and exhaustion. But the ache in his muscles was good. It was purpose, not punishment. Emma turned the office into her own design studio. She taped up drawings of new logos, stars, and flames dancing across the walls. She even started sketching custom paint jobs for customers, her crayons leaving bold streaks of red and gold. "We should offer design services," she declared one morning, her voice serious. "I'm the creative director." Mark laughed, ruffling her hair. "Guess I'm just the mechanic then." Eli chuckled from the workbench, tightening a bolt. "She's not wrong. Boss lady's running the place." Emma grinned. "Exactly." One bright morning, a sleek black sedan rolled into the lot, polished so clean it reflected the shop's sign. The driver stepped out, a man in a tailored suit looking wildly out of place among grease and wrenches. His shoes alone probably cost more than half the bikes Mark had worked on that month. Mark wiped his hands on a rag, wary. "Can I help you?" The man adjusted his tie. "You don't remember me, but my sister does." Mark frowned. "Your sister?" The man nodded. Her chain snapped. "You fixed her bike. Didn't charge her." Recognition hit. The widow in the denim jacket, eyes wet as she hugged him tight. Mark's chest tightened at the memory. "She got the job she was rushing to that day." The man continued. "Changed her life. She's thriving now. She told me about you. I wanted to see if the stories were true." Mark shifted uneasily. "I just fixed a bike." The man smiled faintly, almost sadly. "That's what you think. But sometimes the smallest act resets the course of an entire life." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is from me, and from her. A thank you." Mark hesitated. "I don't—" The man pressed it into his hand. "It's not a handout. It's gratitude. Take it." With that, he slid back into his sedan, the engine purring smooth as it disappeared down the street. Mark stared at the envelope, heart thudding. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a check, enough to cover the shop's rent for an entire year. His knees nearly buckled. He sat heavily on the stool, the paper trembling in his hands. Emma peeked over his shoulder. "Daddy, is that money?" Mark swallowed hard. "Yeah, Bug. More than I've ever seen in one place." Her eyes widened. Does this mean we can buy extra crayons? Mark laughed, a rough, broken sound that spilled into something real. Yeah, Bug. We can buy all the crayons. Eli leaned against the counter, grinning. Guess the shop's safe for a while. Mark nodded slowly, emotion choking him. Safe. Yeah. He tucked the check into the storage shelf beside Harlan's photograph and Cole's note. Not as cash, not as numbers, as proof. Proof that kindness had a way of circling back, sometimes louder than thunder. That night, after Emma drifted to sleep with her pink jacket folded beside her pillow, Mark sat alone at the counter. The Harley gleamed in the corner, a silent guardian. He traced the edge of the envelope with his fingers, thinking of his father. Rusty had built his reputation on second chances, on fixing what others threw away. And now somehow his son was carrying that torch. Mark whispered to the dark, I hope I'm making you proud. The silence didn't answer, but in his chest something eased. The next morning the shop brimmed with laughter. Emma taped another drawing to the wall, this one of the three of them all holding wrenches surrounded by stars. Across the top in bold crayon letters she wrote, Family Team. Ridge stopped by to drop off parts. He glanced at the drawing, then at Mark. His smirk softened into something warmer. Looks about right. Mark exhaled, nodding. For the first time he believed it. Spring had fully settled in by the time the shop reached its busiest rhythm yet. The bay doors stayed open most days, letting warm air drift in with the hum of bees and the smell of freshly cut grass. Engines purred, laughter echoed, and the clang of tools was almost musical. Danner Customs wasn't just surviving anymore, it was alive. Mark found himself moving with ease between lifts, his body carrying the memory of motions he'd once doubted he could learn. His hands, once tentative, now knew when to push, when to ease, when to listen. Grease stained his forearms, sweat streaked his face, but his spirit carried something new, confidence. Eli had transformed too. The skittish boy who once muttered apologies for existing now stood straighter, his motions sure as he adjusted valves or tested wiring. Mark had begun teaching him step by step, watching with quiet pride as he absorbed each lesson. Sometimes, when Eli thought no one was looking, he'd hum under his breath while working a soft, tuneless thing that sounded suspiciously like happiness. Emma ran the front like a true manager. She handed out clipboards, explained repairs in her childlike language, and charmed every customer with her crooked smile. Her pink leather jacket hung proudly on the coat rack, and whenever bikers rolled in, they saluted her as little rivers, their respect as real as if she were grown. One afternoon, while Eli tightened a chain, Mark leaned against the counter watching him. You're getting good at that, he said. Eli shrugged, though a shy grin tugged his lips. You're a good teacher. Mark shook his head. Nah, you just needed someone to hand you a wrench instead of a lecture. Eli's hands stilled. His eyes dropped, and for a moment Mark thought he'd pushed too far. But then Eli whispered, voice rough, Nobody ever did. Not until here. Mark's chest tightened. He reached out, clapped Eli gently on the shoulder. Then we'll keep doing it. One bolt at a time. Eli nodded hard, blinking fast. I won't let you down. You already haven't, Mark said quietly. That evening, when the shop had finally emptied, Ridge stopped by. He found Eli sweeping the lot. Emma perched on the counter, coloring flames on an old receipt, and Mark wiping grease from his hands. Ridge nodded toward Eli. Kid's got good instincts. Reminds me of you. Mark chuckled. Hope that's a compliment. It is, Ridge said. Rusty always said some people just need a place to belong. Looks like you gave him one. Mark looked at Eli, who was carefully lining up the broom against the wall. The boy caught his gaze and offered a small, uncertain smile. Mark smiled back. Yeah, maybe I did. The next day a new customer arrived. A young mother with a baby strapped to her chest, pushing a scooter with one flat tire. Her voice trembled as she explained, I can't afford a replacement. I just need it safe enough to get me to work. Mark crouched down, nodding. We'll make it happen. Eli fetched tools without being asked. Emma entertained the baby with silly faces until the child giggled. When the scooter rolled out of the bay, fixed and sturdy, the woman's eyes filled. I don't know how to thank you. Just keep riding, Mark said simply. She hugged him quick tight, then left the sound of the scooter fading down the street. Eli stared after her, his jaw tight. That was my mom once, he muttered. When I was little. Nobody ever helped her. Mark's throat tightened. He rested a hand on Eli's shoulder. Then we're making sure someone else doesn't feel that alone. Eli swallowed hard, nodding. As weeks passed, Eli's confidence grew. He stayed later, worked harder, absorbed everything. He even began sketching in a battered notebook during lunch breaks, rough diagrams of engines, lists of parts, questions scribbled in the margins. One afternoon, Emma peeked at the notebook and gasped. "Daddy, look." Eli made his own manual. Mark flipped through the pages, stunned. The handwriting was messy, but the detail was sharp. Notes on carburetors, wiring, torque ratios. "You're building more than a notebook," Mark said slowly. "You're building a future." Eli's cheeks reddened. He tried to shrug it off, but the pride in his eyes betrayed him. That night after the garage lights dimmed, Mark sat on the curb outside Emma, curled against his side. Eli leaning on the step nearby. Fireflies blinked in the field across the street. The Harley gleamed faintly through the open door, a silent sentinel. Emma broke the quiet first. "Daddy." "Yeah, Bug. Do you think Grandpa knows what we're doing here?" Mark stared at the Harley, his throat thick. "Yeah, I think he does." Eli's voice came soft but sure. "Then he's proud." Mark turned to him, surprised. Eli met his gaze with steady eyes, and for the first time, Mark believed it. Summer pressed down heavy, the kind that made asphalt shimmer, and the shop's bay doors stand wide open from dawn until dusk. Heat clung to every surface, metal tools burning hot if left too long in the sun, the smell of oil rising, stronger sweat beading on foreheads before noon. But inside Danner Customs, the atmosphere was anything but weary. The garage had become a gathering place. Locals stopped by not just for repairs, but to sit on the old stool by the counter, sip coffee, and talk. Veterans leaned on the workbench, swapping stories. A teenager asked Eli about jobs. Emma darted around in her pink jacket, proudly telling strangers, "We fix things people give up on." Mark often paused in the middle of a repair just to watch them, the small, unlikely family that had formed here. Ridge stopping by with spare parts and advice. Eli's posture no longer hunched with shame, but upright steady. Emma glowing like the shop itself was her stage. And through it all, the Harley in the corner gleamed under the light, a reminder of where it started and how far they'd come. One humid afternoon, the bell jingled and a boy entered no more than 15, maybe 16. His hands were shoved deep into his hoodie pocket. Eyes sharp with suspicion, he pushed a beat-up scooter that looked ready to collapse. "Need it fixed?" Mark asked gently. The boy shrugged. "Maybe, if it's cheap." Emma bounced over before Mark could answer. "We don't give up on things here," she announced proudly. The boy's eyes flickered like he wanted to laugh but couldn't quite. Mark crouched beside the scooter, inspecting. "This thing's on its last legs, but we can get it running. You working somewhere?" The boy hesitated. Fast food joint across town. He didn't add more, but his hunched shoulders told the rest of the story. Mark nodded slowly. "All right, leave it here for a couple hours." When the boy looked nervous, Eli stepped forward. "We'll take care of it. Promise." His voice carried weight because he knew. The boy's eyes narrowed, but then he nodded and slipped outside. They worked hard in the heat, Eli's shirt sticking to his back as he crawled under the scooter. Mark guided him, but let him lead, watching his student work with steady, determined hands. Emma handed them water bottles and narrated the mission like an announcer at a sporting event. Finally, after 2 sweaty hours, the scooter sputtered back to life. Eli grinned, grease smeared across his cheek. "Told you," he muttered under his breath. When the boy returned, he stared wide-eyed at the working scooter. "How much?" he asked quickly, panic in his voice. "Nothing," Mark said. The boy froze. "What do you mean, nothing?" Mark shrugged. "Sometimes people just need a chance." The boy blinked rapidly, gripping the handlebars like they were lifelines. His lips trembled. He turned without a word and pushed the scooter out. His head ducked low, but his back straighter than when he'd walked in. Eli watched him go, eyes distant. "That was me," he said softly. Mark placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not anymore." Word of mouth grew. People called the shop the place where kindness rides. A local newspaper ran a feature complete with a photo of Emma's logo taped to the window. Strangers began stopping by just to see if the story was true. One afternoon, Ridge came in holding a folded letter. City Council's been watching, he said, setting it on the counter. They want to honor you. Mark blinked, stunned. Honor me? For what? Ridge smirked. For not looking away. Emma gasped, eyes wide. Daddy, you're going to be famous. Mark shook his head, overwhelmed. I didn't do anything special. I just gave a man water. Ridge leaned in, voice low. And you kept giving after that. That's rarer than you think. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Locals filled folding chairs a podium set up in front of the town hall. Emma clutched his hand tightly as they called his name. Mark stepped forward, nerves jangling. He looked out at the crowd faces he'd helped, strangers who had heard whispers. Bikers who had become family. He cleared his throat. I didn't do anything extraordinary, he said. His voice wavered but grew steadier. I just didn't look away. And maybe that's what we all need to do a little more of. The crowd rose in applause. Emma squeezed his hand. Eli wiped his eyes quickly when no one was looking. For the first time in years, Mark didn't feel like a man scraping by. He felt like a man standing tall. That evening, as twilight settled, Mark sat on the curb outside the shop. Emma leaned against him, her jacket snug, her crayon-smudged fingers curled around his. Eli sat nearby, sketching diagrams in his notebook, humming softly. The Harley gleamed inside, steady as a heartbeat. Mark whispered into the quiet, We're going to be okay. And for once, he believed it. Late summer carried with it the hum of cicadas and the shimmer of heat waves off the street. Danner Customs had become more than a shop by now. It was a story people told. Strangers arrived not just with broken bikes, but with bruised hopes carrying rumors of a man who fixed both. Mark felt it every time the bell chimed, every time Ridge's crew rumbled by to lean against the bay door, their laughter mixing with the clang of wrenches. What had started with a bottle of water had grown into something bigger than he could have dreamed. Emma ruled her Counter Kingdom pink jacket draped on her chair, crayons scattered like confetti. She had begun to sign her drawings now, Little Rivers. Customers smiled when they saw the name. Some even asked if she could sketch flames or stars for their tanks. Eli had become his shadow in the bay. His hands, once timid, now moved with confidence, guiding chains into place, listening to the subtle whine of an engine with a mechanic's intuition. The haunted look in his eyes had faded, replaced by the quiet determination of someone who finally believed he belonged. One blistering afternoon, as Mark finished tuning a carburetor, the bell over the door jingled. A group stepped in, 3 teenagers, loud with bravado, pushing a sputtering dirt bike. Their laughter carried a sharpness that made Eli stiffen. "You old man," one of them sneered, "fix this up cheap." "Yeah. We don't got time for paperwork." Mark straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the swagger, the posturing, but behind it he caught something else, fear. Hunger. The kind of look he'd once seen in the mirror. He spoke evenly. "We do things right here. You want it running, you leave it, and you treat my shop with respect." The teens exchanged glances, muttering. One cursed under his breath. Eli's fist clenched, his body taut like a coiled spring. Mark put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Easy," he murmured. Finally, one of the teens scoffed. "Whatever, man. Just don't mess it up." They left the bike and slouched out, muttering threats they didn't mean. When the door closed, silence lingered. Eli's jaw tightened. "Why'd you help them? They don't deserve it." Mark looked at him carefully. "Because once someone could have said the same about me. Or about you. But someone gave us a chance anyway." Eli blinked, his anger softening into thought. It took hours, sweat dripping into their eyes, tools slipping from tired hands. But by nightfall, the dirt bike coughed to life. When the teens returned, their surprise was genuine. They tried to mask it with smirks, but gratitude slipped through in their eyes. One muttered, "Thanks, almost too low to hear." After they left, Eli shook his head. "Think they'll change?" Mark exhaled, wiping his brow. "Maybe not today, but they'll remember this. Sometimes that's enough." Eli nodded slowly. Weeks later, word of the shop reached beyond town lines. A regional biker magazine ran a feature calling Mark the man who fixes what the world forgets. Reporters arrived again, snapping photos of the pink jacket, on the coat rack the Harley in the corner, the flame-smeared logo in the window. Mark declined interviews, but Ridge stepped in with words rough and true. I've ridden with men who had nothing but noise. This man had nothing, and he gave silence to someone who needed it. That's louder than any roar. The story spread again. More bikes rolled in. More lives touched the counters of Danner Customs. One evening, as the shop closed, Cole himself arrived. His silver beard gleamed in the setting sun. He carried a folded leather jacket darker than midnight, with an AFA patch stitched across the back. You don't have to wear it, Cole said softly, handing it to Mark. But you've earned it. Mark's throat closed. His fingers brushed the heavy leather, the patch that once belonged to his father's world. He swallowed hard. I don't know if I deserve this. Cole's eyes were steady. You already do. A jacket doesn't make the man. The man makes the jacket, and you've proven what kind of man you are. Emma peeked out from behind the counter, her eyes wide. Daddy, are you in the club now? Mark knelt, folding the jacket over his arm, looking at her. No bug. I'm in the family, Ridge smirked. Same thing. That night, after the riders left, Mark hung the jacket on the wall beside Emma's pink one. Two symbols side by side, one earned in grease and silence, the other stitched in love and fire. He stared at them a long time, his heart heavy with something he'd never known how to name until now. Belonging. Autumn crept back softer this time, its chill wrapped in gold and crimson leaves that swirled across the street in front of Danner Customs. The bay doors were propped open, letting cool air carry the scent of oil and wood polish. Inside the garage felt less like a workplace and more like a heartbeat, steady, constant, alive. Emma perched on the counter in her pink jacket crayons scattered everywhere, sketching a new sign built on kindness. She hummed softly as she drew flames licking up around the letters, her tongue poking out in concentration. Eli was hunched over a lift, guiding his hands confidently through the guts of a stubborn engine. His notebook sat open beside him, filled with diagrams and notes smudged with grease, but glowing with potential. Mark moved between them, wiping his palms on a rag, his tool belt heavy at his waist. His eyes swept the shop, catching every detail, the photos on the wall. The shelves marked stories, the Harley gleaming in the corner. The sight filled him with something he hadn't known for years, peace. Late afternoon brought the low rumble of engines. Not 40 this time, just a handful. Ridge led the way, Cole beside him, the rest of the riders fanning out until they formed a familiar wall of steel outside the shop. Emma squealed, dashing to the bay door. Uncle Ridge, she shouted, arms waving wildly. Ridge chuckled, ruffling her hair as he stepped inside. How's my little captain? Busy, she said seriously, pointing to her drawing. We're branding. Cole laughed, the sound deep and warm. Looks better than half the paint jobs I've seen. Mark smiled, shaking his head. She's taking over. That was always the plan, Ridge said with a grin. They weren't here for a repair. They were here for something bigger. Cole set a folded note on the counter, his expression solemn. The city council wants to honor you again. Bigger this time. They're calling it an example of moral courage in working-class America. Mark stiffened. All this for giving a man water. Ridge's eyes softened. It wasn't the water, brother. It was the way you gave it. No cameras, no witnesses, just kindness when nobody was looking. Emma tugged his sleeve, whispering, Daddy, you have to go. You have to tell them. Mark swallowed the weight of it, pressing down. He looked at Ridge, then Cole, then Eli, then finally at Emma. He saw their faces, their faith in him, their belief that what he'd done mattered. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll go. The event filled the small community center to bursting. Folding chairs lined the hall, neighbors crowding the aisles, kids perched on laps. A banner stretched across the stage, celebrating everyday heroes. Mark stood behind the podium, hands shaking. Emma sat in the front row, chin lifted proudly. Eli leaned forward, his notebook forgotten in his lap. Ridge and Cole stood in the back like sentinels. Mark cleared his throat. His voice came rough at first, then steadier. I'm not a hero, he said simply. I'm a mechanic, a father, a man who made mistakes. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just didn't look away when someone needed help, and maybe that's what we all can do, not look away. Silence held for a beat. Then applause thundered, filling the hall, rattling his bones. Emma jumped to her feet, clapping until her small hands turned red. Mark's throat tightened, his eyes burning. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Winter came quickly after, but this time it didn't feel harsh. Locals brought pies, cookies, and warm coffee to the shop. Riders dropped by with firewood stories and laughter. Emma decorated the office window with stars, each one cut from glitter paper, each one taped with pride. On Christmas Eve, the sound returned the familiar thunder of 40 engines rolling down the street. Mark stepped outside with Emma and Eli, his breath fogging the air. This time the riders weren't here for him. They were here for her. Ridge opened a large box and pulled out a brand new miniature bike painted in pink flames, her name in gold across the tank Little Rivers. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. For me, for our Captain Cole said with a grin. Family rides together, Emma squealed, throwing her arms around Mark's waist. Daddy, I'm really one of them now. Mark bent low, kissing the top of her helmeted head. You always were, Bug. The riders cheered. Engines roared. Snowflakes fell. And in that moment, under the glow of the shop sign, Mark realized something simple but powerful. This wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a legacy. It was family. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.